archive of human history is no longer written in stone or ink. It is written in binary code, in signal pings, and in the digital residue left behind when a life abruptly intersects with the unknown. We are digital archaeologists, sifting through the noise to find the signal. Welcome to the file. Tonight, we examine a case that balances precariously on the edge of the rational and the inexplicable. It is a modern disappearance, yet it carries the archaic weight of folklore, a story of a traveler swallowed by the landscape, led astray by lights in the distance, and vanishing while a tether to the living world was pressed against his ear. This is the case of Brandon Swanson. To understand the anomaly, we must first understand the setting. We are not looking at a haunted house or a dense, unexplored jungle. We are looking at the American Midwest, specifically the rural grid of southwest Minnesota. It is a landscape defined by aggressive normalcy, flat, agricultural, and meticulously divided into square miles by gravel roads that stretch toward the horizon with mathematical precision. During the day, it is mundane. At night, under a new moon, it becomes a liminal space, a vast, featureless void where the sky and the ground merge into a singular entity of darkness. The date is May 14th, 2008. It is the end of the spring semester for Minnesota West Community and Technical College. Brandon Swanson, 19 years old, has completed his coursework in wind energy. There is a celebration in Canby, Minnesota. It is a standard gathering of peers, marking the transition from academic pressure to summer freedom. At shortly after midnight, Brandon departs Canby for his home in Marshall, a drive of approximately 30 miles. The route is familiar. The roads are paved. The conditions are clear. There is no fog, no storm, no external force that should disrupt the transit of a capable driver. Yet, at 1:54 in the morning, the first deviation occurs. Brandon contacts his parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, from his cell phone. The call is not frantic. It is frustrated. He explains that he has driven his car, a Chevrolet Lumina, into a ditch. He believes he is near the town of Lind. He is uninjured. The car is undamaged, merely high-centered on an incline, the wheels spinning uselessly against the earth. This is the beginning of the incident, but it is also the beginning of the distortion. Brandon asks his parents to come pick him up. They agree immediately. They drive to the location Brandon describes, Lind, Minnesota. They stay on the line with him or call back intermittently, maintaining a digital lifeline. For 45 minutes, the parents search the area around Lind. They flash their headlights. They drive down the grid roads. Brandon, sitting in his vehicle, does the same. He flashes his lights. He honks his horn. Neither party sees the other. It is here that the high strangeness begins to bleed into the narrative. We have two sets of observers in what they believe to be the same geographic coordinate system, signaling to one another, yet existing in mutually exclusive realities. Brandon is adamant about his location. He sees lights in the distance. He describes the topography, but his parents see nothing but the dark fields of Lind. Frustration mounts. The digital tether begins to fray. At roughly 2:30 in the morning, Brandon makes a fatal decision. He tells his father that he is not going to wait in the car any longer. He sees lights toward what he believes is the town of Lind. He decides to walk toward them. This is the moment the safety of the vessel is abandoned. Brandon exits the Chevrolet Lumina. He is now a pedestrian in a hostile environment. The temperature is roughly 40 degrees Fahrenheit. It is not freezing, but it is cold enough to sap the warmth from a human body over time. He is wearing jeans, a short-sleeved polo shirt, and a sweatshirt. He is also legally blind in his left eye, a detail that becomes relevant when navigating uneven terrain in total darkness. The call remains active. This is the most haunting aspect of the Swanson file. This is not a disappearance that happens in silence. It happens during a conversation. For the next 47 minutes, Brandon Swanson remains on the phone with his son. We must analyze this duration. 47 minutes is a significant amount of time to walk. An average human walking at a moderate pace can cover over 2 miles in that span. During this walk, Brandon provides a running commentary of his environment. He describes fences. He describes gravel roads. He describes hearing water. The conversation is lucid. He is not slurring his words. He is not hallucinating monsters. He is a young man annoyed by a car accident, walking toward a town he believes is just over the horizon. However, the dissonance between his description and the reality of Lind continues to grow. He mentions walking along a fence line to avoid the wind. He mentions the lights getting closer, then seeming to stay the same distance away. This phenomenon is often associated with the will-o'-the-wisp in folklore, or in modern terms, the lack of depth perception when viewing distant illumination across flat terrain. As the minutes tick by, the atmosphere of the call shifts. The annoyance turns to fatigue. The cold begins to intrude. The darkness of the Minnesota fields is absolute. There is no ambient light pollution from a major city. There is only the starlight and the glow of the cell phone screen. Brandon mentions that he is cutting across fields to save time. This is a departure from the structure of the road. He is entering the wild spaces between the grid. The ground here is unpredictable, plowed furrows, hidden badger holes, sudden drops in elevation. At this point, the digital archaeologist must pause, and consider the sensory deprivation Brandon is experiencing. He is one-eyed, tired, cold, and operating under a false geographic assumption. Every step he takes is based on a map that exists only in his mind. A map that does not correlate with the physical earth beneath his feet. The parents are still driving, still searching, their anxiety rising with every passing minute of emptiness. Then comes the water. Brandon reports hearing running water. He believes he is near the Yellow Medicine River. He describes stepping onto a fence to gain a vantage point or to cross an obstacle. The sound of the wind is audible through the phone. The reception is holding, a miracle of signal in such a remote area. It is just after 3:10 in the morning. The call has lasted 47 minutes. Brandon is speaking to his father. He is navigating the terrain. There is no warning. There is no sound of another person. There is no screech of tires. There is no indication of a predator, human or animal. Brandon speaks a short, sharp sentence. 2 words. "Oh shit." These are the final words of Brandon Swanson. They are not screamed. They are not whispered. They are spoken with the tone of sudden, jarring realization, like a person who has slipped, or a person who has seen something impossible, or a person who has realized in a split second that their reality has collapsed. Immediately following the expletive, the line does not go dead. This is a crucial detail, often overlooked in sensationalized retellings. The call does not terminate instantly. There is silence. Brandon Swanson shouts his son's name. Brandon. Brandon. The phone is still transmitting. The digital connection is alive. But the organic component, the human voice, has been excised. Brian listens. He strains to hear anything against the speaker of his phone. Is there the sound of splashing water? The crunch of gravel? The rustling of dry cornstalks? There is nothing, just the low-level static of a cellular connection, holding open a channel to avoid. Brian hangs up and immediately calls back. Ring, 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 ring. Voicemail. He calls again. Voicemail. The transition is instantaneous. 1 second, Brandon is walking, talking, and navigating toward a perceived sanctuary. The next second, he is gone. The psychological impact of this moment on the parents is unfathomable. They are in a car, perhaps only miles away, surrounded by the same darkness, staring at the same stars. They have not just lost contact, they have witnessed an erasure. Let us analyze the seconds immediately following the silence. The parents are now frantic. They continue to search Lind. They call the police at 6:30 in the morning, after hours of desperate, blind searching in the dark. But here is where the anomaly deepens. Here is where the glitch in the narrative reveals itself. When law enforcement eventually accesses the cellular data, the digital footprints left by Brandon's phone, they do not point to Lind. They do not point to the location Brandon was so certain he occupied. The triangulation of the cell towers places Brandon Swanson nearly 25 miles away from where he said he was. He was not near Lind. He was near the town of Taunton. He was walking west, not east. Every landmark he described, every light he saw, every road he crossed was interpreted through the lens of his false location. He was narrating a journey through a landscape that did not exist on the map he thought he was reading. The car, the Chevrolet Lumina, was eventually found. It was located exactly where the cell tower data suggested, abandoned in a ditch off a gravel road on the line between Lincoln and Yellow Medicine counties. The vehicle was undamaged. The keys were gone. The grass around it showed no sign of a struggle. But Brandon was not there. The silence that began after those two final words has now lasted for years. The phone, the device that carried his voice into the void, has never been recovered. The lights he walked toward remain unidentified. Were they the lights of Taunton? The lights of a grain elevator? Or were they something else entirely? A visual lure in the deep darkness of the plains? The incident of Brandon Swanson's disappearance is a terrifying example of how fragile our grip on reality truly is. We rely on our senses to tell us where we are. We rely on our technology to keep us connected. But in the early morning hours of May 14th, both failed. Brandon Swanson walked off the edge of the known world. He did not vanish into thin air. He vanished into the earth, into the water, or into the silence itself. As we move forward into the investigation of the search and the theories, keep those two words in your mind. Oh shit. Was it a slip? A fall? Or was it the moment he finally saw exactly where he was? This concludes the analysis of the incident. The data stream pauses here. To understand the vanishing of Brandon Swanson, we must first dismantle the world as we know it today and reconstruct the specific, fragile reality of May 2008. We often view past events through the lens of current technology, assuming that digital breadcrumbs are eternal and precise. But 2008 was a liminal era, a threshold moment in the timeline of human connectivity. It was a period where we possessed the illusion of constant connection, but lacked the infrastructure to guarantee it. Consider the device in Brandon's pocket. It was a Motorola SLVR L7, a slim, candy bar style phone released in 2005. It was a relic of the pre-smartphone dominance. It had no GPS navigation as we understand it now. There were no detailed satellite maps updating in real time. No blue dot guiding him back to the highway. It was a device made for voice communication and rudimentary text messaging, operating on a cellular network that was patchy at best, especially in the rural topography of western Minnesota. This technological context is the first pillar of this mystery. When Brandon called his parents, he was not transmitting coordinates. He was transmitting perception. And in the pitch black of a rural night, perception is a liar. We must look at the digital forensics of the search. In modern investigations, law enforcement can pinpoint a device within a few meters. In 2008, in a region dominated by farmland, the technology relied on cell tower triangulation, or more often, simple sector identification. A cell tower covers a 360-degree radius, usually divided into 3 sectors. When a phone pings a tower, the network knows which face of the tower received the signal. It gives you a slice of a pie, a wedge of territory that extends outward for miles. The tragedy here originated in a digital mirage. Brandon's phone pinged a tower near the town of Lind. Based on the signal strength and the sector data, the initial search grid was established surrounding that town. His parents, Brian and Annette, drove toward Lind. Brandon, on the phone, believed he was near Lind. The logic of the machine and the logic of the victim were in agreement. They were both wrong. The data had provided a general vicinity based on the nearest tower his phone could shout to. But it did not account for the vagaries of radio waves bouncing over flat terrain, or the possibility that he was on the extreme fringe of a different tower's range. It was only later, after the silence had set in, that a more complex analysis of the call data records revealed the truth. Brandon was nearly 20 miles away from where he thought he was. He was nowhere near Lind. He was near the town of Porter. This 20-mile displacement is the defining variable of the case. It changes the narrative from a young man walking home to a young man walking into a void. Let us transition from the digital landscape to the physical one to understand why Brandon could not simply find a road. One must understand the geography of Lincoln and Yellow Medicine counties. This is the Great Plains. It is the public land survey system, manifest as physical reality, the Jeffersonian grid. The land is divided into perfect 1-mile squares, section by section, etched by gravel roads and field lines. In daylight, this grid is navigable. It offers sightlines that stretch to the horizon. But under a moonless sky in rural Minnesota, the grid dissolves. The difference between a maintained gravel road and a field approach, a dirt path used by tractors to enter crops, is negligible. To a sedan suspended on its chassis on a gravel incline, a field edge looks exactly like a road shoulder. Brandon mentioned he had driven his car into a ditch. He believed he was just off a main artery. But the location of the car, found later, suggests he had been traveling on minimum maintenance roads, venturing deeper into the agricultural labyrinth. This brings us to the atmospheric conditions of the night of May 14th. It was cool, roughly 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Not freezing, but cold enough to induce hypothermia if one is wet and stationary. The wind cuts across the plains with no windbreaks to stop it. And then there is the darkness. City dwellers often forget the weight of true darkness. In the absence of light pollution, the horizon vanishes. The sky and the earth merge into a single wall of black. In this sensory deprivation tank, the human mind clings to any source of light. This is known as the beacon effect. During the 47-minute phone call with his father, Brandon mentioned seeing lights. He described them as the lights of Lind. He began walking toward them. He made a rational decision based on visual data. He decided to cut across the fields to reach the town, rather than sticking to the gravel roads, which he felt were taking him in circles. This decision to leave the road is the second pillar of the tragedy. In survival psychology, this is a fatal error. The road is a known quantity. The field is a variable. By entering the fields, Brandon entered a space intersected by fences, muddy ravines, and the Yellow Medicine River. The river itself is a character in this narrative. The Yellow Medicine is not a grand, wide waterway. It is a tributary, twisting through the farmland like a snake. In May, fed by spring rains, it runs high and fast. The banks are steep, composed of soft, slippery mud. In the darkness, the water does not reflect starlight, it absorbs it. You would not see the river until the ground beneath your feet ceased to exist. We must also analyze the psychological state of the subject. Brandon was 19 years old. He had just finished a semester of college. He had celebrated with friends. There is the question of alcohol, but without a body, the toxicology is purely speculative. However, even a sober mind is susceptible to the phenomenon of spatial disorientation. When a human being loses their reference points, the internal gyroscope fails. Experiments have shown that people trying to walk a straight line in the dark will inevitably walk in circles, usually spiraling tighter and tighter. Brandon believed he was walking a straight line toward the lights of Lind. But if he was 20 miles away, what lights was he seeing? The leading theory among those who have studied the topography is that the lights were not a town at all. They may have been the lights of a grain elevator in Taunton, or perhaps the safety lights on a wind turbine. Or, in a more cruel twist of physics, they could have been the lights of Porter, the town he was actually near. But his mind labeled them Lind because that is where he expected to be. This is confirmation, bias weaponized by geography. conversation between Brandon and his father is one of the most haunting artifacts of this case. It lasted 47 minutes. Think about that duration. 47 minutes of connection. They discussed where to meet. They flashed their headlights, hoping to see a return signal in the sky. "I don't see you," his father said. "I don't see you either," Brandon replied. They were two ships, signaling in two completely different oceans. The psychological toll on the parents, knowing they were driving with purpose, but ultimately driving away from their son, is a heavy context to bear. During this call, Brandon's demeanor shifted. He went from frustrated to determined, and finally to something else. He described fences. He described hearing water. These were the clues that did not fit the map of Lind, but fit perfectly the map of the Yellow Medicine River basin near Porter. The technology of the era allowed them to stay connected just long enough to record the timeline of the disappearance, but not well enough to prevent it. It was a digital lifeline that acted as a noose, keeping Brandon focused on the phone and the distant lights rather than the immediate hazards of the terrain. We must also consider the silence that followed. At the end of the call, Brandon exclaimed an expletive. Then the line went dead. There are two technical possibilities for the call termination. One, the battery died. Two, the phone was destroyed or submerged. The Motorola SLVR had a decent battery life for the time, but a 47-minute call in an area with poor signal requires the phone to transmit at maximum power, draining the cell rapidly. However, the suddenness of the end, the sharp cut following a verbal reaction, suggests a catastrophic event rather than a power fade. If he slipped into the Yellow Medicine River, the phone would have shorted out instantly. The water was cold. The shock of immersion, the weight of wet clothes, the steep mud banks. It paints a grim clinical picture of the final moments. But this deep dive into the context reveals a disturbing paradox. The search for Brandon Swanson was massive. It involved K-9 units, aerial surveillance, and hundreds of volunteers walking shoulder to shoulder through the very fields where his phone last pinged. They found the car. It was hung up on an embankment, indistinguishable from the road edge, just as he had described. But they did not find Brandon. The area is agricultural. It is not a jungle. It is plowed, planted, and harvested. It is monitored by farmers who know every acre of their land. A body in a field should have been found during the harvest. A body in the river should have surfaced or snagged on debris downstream. The fact that neither occurred suggests that our understanding of the context is still missing a piece. We have the time. We have the technology. We have the location. But the intersection of these facts creates a null value. The context of the Brandon Swanson mystery is ultimately a story about the failure of systems. The grid system of the roads failed to guide him. The cellular system failed to locate him. The sensory system of his own eyes failed to warn him. He vanished in the gap between the map and the territory. In 2008, we were just beginning to trust the digital world to keep us safe. This case serves as a cold reminder that the physical world is indifferent to our signals. It does not care if you have a signal. It only cares if you can see the edge of the cliff. As we move forward to examine the theories in the next section, keep this environment in mind. A flat black void, a misleading light on the horizon, a voice on the phone fading into static, and a river that winds through the dark like a secret kept by the earth itself. Part 3. The Investigation. When the sun rose on May 14th, 2008, it illuminated a landscape that bore no resemblance to the one Brandon Swanson had described to his parents the night before. There were no parking lots. There were no highway ramps. There was only the vast, flat expanse of rural Minnesota, a tapestry of gravel roads, drainage ditches, and freshly tilled fields stretching out toward a horizon that offered no answers. The investigation into the disappearance of Brandon Swanson is a study in dissonance. It is a collision between the objective reality of forensic evidence and the subjective reality of a young man's final perceptions. To understand why this case remains unsolved, we must dissect the gap between where Brandon thought he was and where the digital and physical footprints suggest he actually walked. The first tangible piece of evidence appeared early in the search. At 12:30 in the afternoon, barely 12 hours after the line went dead, searchers located Brandon's Chevrolet Lumina. It was not on the outskirts of Marshall. It was not near Lind. It was 25 miles away, abandoned on a gravel turnaround near the town of Taunton, sitting precariously on the edge of a steep incline. The positioning of the vehicle tells a specific story. The car was hung up on the embankment, the wheels suspended just enough to prevent traction. There was no damage to the body of the car. There was no sign of a struggle. The keys were missing. This physical scene corroborates the beginning of Brandon's call. He had indeed driven into a ditch and could not get out. However, the location shattered the premise of the rescue mission. Brandon had spent 47 minutes guiding his father toward a location that was 25 miles to the southeast. Every landmark he described was a hallucination of geography, a misinterpretation of the dark shapes around him. This brings us to the theories, which have proliferated across internet forums and police precincts for over a decade. The investigation initially operated under the assumption that Brandon was simply lost and walking. But as hours turned into days and the extensive search of the Yellow Medicine River yielded nothing. The theories grew darker. The most prevalent theory, and the one favored by law enforcement, is accidental death due to environmental exposure, specifically hypothermia. While the temperature that night was approximately 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is not freezing, it is cold enough to induce hypothermia in someone who is wet and fatigued. If Brandon had fallen into the water, as the search dogs later suggested, the onset of confusion would have been rapid. This leads to discussions of paradoxical undressing, a phenomenon where hypothermia victims, in their final stages of delirium, feel an intense, burning heat and strip off their clothing. Searchers found no clothing. They found no shoes. If Brandon succumbed to the elements, the prairie swallowed the evidence whole. However, the internet sleuths and digital archaeologists who frequent forums like Web Sleuths and the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit have long pointed to the final 2 words Brandon spoke: "Oh shit." This utterance has become the Rorschach test of the Swanson case. To the proponents of the accidental death theory, it signifies a slip, a misstep, the moment his foot found air instead of gravel, plunging him into the swift, cold waters of the Yellow Medicine River. But there is a second camp. This group analyzes the silence that followed. The phone call did not end with a splash, a scream, or the crunch of an impact. It ended with a button press. The call was terminated. The phone remained on and functional, possibly for days afterwards, though it was never answered again. This detail fuels the foul play theories. Why would a young man falling into a river hang up the phone? Some posit that Brandon stumbled upon something he was not meant to see. In the rural darkness, illicit activities, methamphetamine production, or illegal dumping are not uncommon. Did the "oh shit" signify the realization that he was not alone? We must look at the digital archaeology of the case to weigh these possibilities. In 2008, we were on the cusp of the smartphone revolution, but we were not there yet. We did not have the precise GPS breadcrumbs we leave behind today. The investigation relied on cell tower triangulation. The call records paint a picture of a digital ghost moving through the void. Brandon's phone pinged off a tower near Minnesota. This technical data is what led police to the Taunton area, contradicting Brandon's own verbal reports. The investigation revealed that Brandon had been walking generally northwest, away from the car, and toward the lights of Taunton. Here lies the tragedy of perception. Investigators believe Brandon saw the lights of a grain elevator in Taunton, and, in his disoriented state, convinced himself he was looking at the skyline of Marshall. This is a phenomenon known as confirmation bias mapping. He overlaid the map in his head onto the terrain in front of him. He saw a fence line and called it a guardrail. He saw a gravel path and called it a driveway. He saw a distant industrial light and called it home. The search effort was massive. Over 500 volunteers, 9 distinct law enforcement agencies, and professional tracking dogs scoured the area. The bloodhounds provided the most compelling, yet frustrating, lead. They picked up Brandon's scent at the car. They tracked him down the gravel road, through the tall grass, and toward the banks of the Yellow Medicine River. And there the story stops. The dogs lost the scent at the water's edge. This suggests he entered the river. The river at that time was high and running fast. The water temperature was chilling. The theory holds that he tried to cross, was swept away, and his body was deposited somewhere downstream, perhaps trapped beneath a snag or buried in the deep silt that lines the riverbed. Yet the river has been searched. It has been dragged. It has been walked by searchers in waders when the water levels dropped in subsequent years. Nothing has been found. No keys. No phone. No glasses. This absence of physical evidence is what keeps the online forums alive. In the digital realm, the case of Brandon Swanson has achieved a sort of immortality. Users pore over satellite imagery of Yellow Medicine County, circling anomalous shadows in the fields, speculating about farm wells and abandoned cisterns. They analyze the timeline of the phone calls, looking for discrepancies. One persistent thread in the digital investigation is the concept of the zone of silence. This refers to the psychological state Brandon might have been in. There is a documented condition called the break-off phenomenon, usually associated with pilots flying at high altitudes, but applicable to those lost in monotonous landscapes. A feeling of detachment from the earth, a dissociation from reality. Did Brandon walk into a fugue state? The police reports indicate that alcohol was likely involved. Brandon had been at 2 gatherings that evening. While friends stated he did not appear visibly intoxicated, even a mild buzz, combined with fatigue, stress, and the visual deprivation of a moonless rural night, can be catastrophic. Alcohol impairs depth perception and thermal regulation. It makes the impossible seem walkable. We must also consider the farming cycle. It was May. The fields were being worked. Is it possible that Brandon, exhausted, curled up to sleep in a field and was accidentally struck by heavy machinery, then panic concealed by a frightened worker? It is a grim hypothesis, one that appears frequently in discussions of rural disappearances, but there is zero forensic evidence to support it. No blood, no shredded clothing, no confession. The investigation hit a wall, not because of a lack of effort, but because of the topography of the land itself. The area around the Yellow Medicine River is a mix of agricultural order and chaotic wetlands. It is a liminal space where the water table shifts, where mud can act like quicksand, and where the vegetation grows high enough to hide a body within weeks. Digital archaeology reveals another layer to the tragedy: the cell phone data. The phone continued to ping towers after the call ended. It suggests the device was not immediately destroyed by water. If Brandon fell in, did the phone land on the bank? Or did he manage to pull himself out, only to succumb to hypothermia in a location that shielded the signal? The family kept the landline active for years, waiting for a ring that never came. They left the porch light on. These are analog acts of hope in a digital mystery. Why remains this unsolved? It is not for a lack of clues, but rather a contradiction of them. We have the car fact. We have the phone records fact. We have the scent trail fact. And we have Brandon's voice fact. But they do not fit together. The voice described a world that did not exist. The scent trail ended at a barrier that has refused to yield a body. The phone records point to a sector that has been combed by hundreds of human eyes. The investigation forces us to confront the fragility of human navigation. We trust our senses. We trust that if we see lights, we know what they are. We trust that if we walk toward a road, it will lead us somewhere. Brandon Swanson walked with purpose. He walked with the confidence of someone who believed he was saving himself, while every step took him deeper into the void. In the end, the police files remain open. The case is classified as a missing persons investigation, but the tone of the reports has shifted over the years from urgency to a somber, bureaucratic maintenance. Every year, during deer hunting season, the sheriff issues a reminder to hunters to keep an eye out for anything unusual: a scrap of fabric, a bone, a glint of metal. The theories churn on. Was it a crime of opportunity? A tragic accident? A psychological break? The internet continues to investigate, turning over the same pixels, enhancing the same audio, hoping that a fresh pair of eyes might see the pattern that has eluded everyone else. But the prairie keeps its secrets. It absorbs sound. It absorbs light. And in the case of Brandon Swanson, it appears to have absorbed the truth itself. In part 4, we will conclude our excavation. We will look at the legacy of this disappearance, the legislation it inspired, and the haunting reality of what it means to vanish in the age of constant connectivity. We will ask the final question: in a world where we are always tracked, how does someone simply cease to be? Part 4. The aftermath. The search dogs have long since gone home. The helicopters have been grounded, and the volunteers have returned to their daily lives. The physical, frantic energy of the initial search in May of 2008 has dissipated, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence that hangs over the farmlands of western Minnesota. What remains is not a resolution, but a void, a space where a person used to be, now occupied only by questions, legislation, and a digital footprint that refuses to decay. When we examine the legacy of the Brandon Swanson case, we must first look at the tangible changes it forced upon the world. Tragedy often acts as the architect of policy, and this case is a prime example. In the immediate hours following Brandon's disappearance, his parents were met with a bureaucratic wall common in law enforcement at the time. They were told that Brandon was an adult, that he had a right to go missing, and that perhaps he was simply blowing off steam. This delay, this hesitation to treat an adult disappearance as an emergency, likely cost valuable hours during which the trail was still fresh and the cellular data was still live. The frustration of the Swanson family eventually transmuted into action. They pushed for change, refusing to let the systemic apathy that hindered their search affect another family. On May 7th, 2009, Governor Tim Pawlenty signed Brandon's Law into effect. This legislation mandated that law enforcement must take a report and begin an investigation immediately for any missing adult, regardless of age, if the circumstances indicate they may be in danger. It aligned the urgency of adult cases with that of child abductions. It is a significant victory. It is a piece of legislation that has undoubtedly saved lives in the years since. Yet, when one reads the text of the bill, there is a distinct melancholy between the lines. It is a legacy born of absence. It is a law that exists only because a 19-year-old student vanished into the dark and never came back. For the Swansons, it is a monumental achievement, but it is not closure. It does not answer the phone. It does not bring the Chevy Lumina back to the road. It does not tell us what Brandon saw in the seconds before the line went dead. If we move from the legislative halls back to the physical site, we find a landscape that seems aggressively indifferent to the mystery it holds. To visit the area around the Yellow Medicine River today is to step into a quintessential liminal space. It is a transition zone between civilization and the wild, between the ordered grid of the cornfields and the chaotic, muddy banks of the water. The gravel roads of Yellow Medicine and Lincoln counties remain largely unchanged. They are long, straight arteries of gray stone and dust that stretch toward the horizon, intersecting at perfect right angles. In the daylight, they are mundane, agricultural, and vast. But at night, the context shifts. Without streetlights, without landmarks, the geography dissolves. The distance between Porter, Taunton, and Minneota becomes abstract. Standing on the shoulder of the road where Brandon's car was found, one is struck by the immense silence. It is not a peaceful silence. It is a waiting silence. The river itself is narrow and winding, often hidden by steep embankments and brush. It is not a mighty torrent, but a sluggish, persistent flow of dark water. Despite extensive searches, dragging operations, and the lowering of water levels, the river has yielded nothing. If Brandon is there, the earth and the water have claimed him entirely, integrating him into the sediment, hiding him with a thoroughness that defies modern forensic technology. Then there is the digital afterlife of the case. As a digital archaeologist, this is where the haunting truly resonates. The internet does not forget, but it does obsess. The disappearance of Brandon Swanson has become a cornerstone of online unsolved mystery communities. It is discussed in forums, dissected in podcasts, and analyzed on video platforms. The fascination stems from the singular, chilling detail of the final call. The expletive, the sudden silence. It is a moment of pure, unadulterated reality that cuts through the noise of urban legends and fictional creepypastas. We have the transcript of a life ending, or at least transitioning into the unknown in real time. However, the digital ecosystem has also muddied the waters. Theories range from the plausible to the absurd. Some users on archived message boards suggest foul play, positing that Brandon stumbled upon something he was not meant to see in the rural darkness: a drug deal, a crime in progress. Others suggest he fell into a cistern or an abandoned well, trapped beneath the earth, unable to signal for help. There are darker, more fringe theories that speak of the paranormal, citing the strange lights Brandon reported seeing. They suggest that the lights were not the town of Lind or Porter, but something deceptive, luring him off the road and into the deep fields. While we must remain objective and grounded in facts, we cannot ignore how these theories reflect our collective psyche. We project our fear of the dark, our fear of being lost, onto Brandon's narrative. We use his disappearance to categorize our own anxieties about isolation. Let us look at the unanswered questions that keep this case active in the minds of investigators and amateurs alike. First, the discrepancy of location. Brandon believed he was near Lind. His car was found near Taunton, 25 miles away. How does a local boy, familiar with the area, lose his orientation so profoundly? Was it simply fatigue and darkness? Or was there a neurological event, a concussion from a minor slip? Second, the behavior of the tracking dogs. Search canines trailed his scent from the car down a gravel road to the river, and then up along the bank. But then the scent simply stopped. It did not fade, it ceased. Did he enter the water there? Did he get into another vehicle? Or did the wind simply carry the scent away, leaving the dogs confused and the searchers without a direction? Third, the phone. Brandon's phone remained on, and routed calls for nearly 24 hours after the crash. It rang and rang, a digital heartbeat pulsing in the grass, until the battery finally died. Despite this, and despite the triangulation data that narrowed the search area, the device has never been found. A cell phone is not biodegradable. It is plastic, glass, and metal. It should still be there, buried under years of leaves and soil. A technological fossil waiting to be unearthed. Its absence is almost as frustrating as Brandon's. Forth the lights. Brandon was walking toward lights he believed were a town. He walked for 47 minutes. In the flat topography of Minnesota, you can see town lights from miles away. But if he was walking toward Taunton or Porter, he should have reached them, or at least drawn significantly closer. If he was walking toward a farm, why did he never arrive? What were the lights that guided him into the void? As we close the file on this analysis, we are left with a profound sense of unease. The disappearance of Brandon Swanson challenges our reliance on technology and our confidence in our understanding of the world. We carry devices that connect us to the entire sum of human knowledge, yet a battery can die, a signal can drop, and we can be rendered utterly alone. We have mapped the entire globe via satellite, yet a human being can step off a gravel road and vanish into a pocket of invisibility. There is a concept in philosophy known as ontology, the study of being. Brandon's case disrupts our ontological security. We expect cause and effect. We expect that if a car crashes, there is a driver. If a person walks, they arrive. If a phone rings, it is somewhere. Here, those chains are broken. The legacy of this event is not just the law that bears his name. It is the reminder of how thin the veil is between safety and peril. It reminds us that the world is vast and we are small. The cornfields of Minnesota are not malicious, but they are huge and they are quiet. They keep their secrets well. Tonight, somewhere in the archives of a server farm, the data of Brandon's phone records sits frozen. On a map in a police station, a pin marks a spot near Taunton. And out there, in the physical world, the wind blows through the grass along the yellow Medicine River. We want answers. We want the narrative to close with a discovery, a funeral, a reason. But the universe is under no obligation to make sense to us. Sometimes the line just goes dead. Sometimes the lights we follow are not what we think they are. And sometimes the only thing left behind is the static. This concludes our deep dive into the disappearance of Brandon Swanson. Stay curious, stay observant, and if you find yourself driving down a gravel road in the dark, keep your eyes on the path and do not get out of the car. End of part 4.